I'm your host, Emmanuel. Keep on following us on Twitter, Facebook, and also on YouTube at Romy TV Africa for our daily brief and news-making headlines.
Now, Chief Jane Muchui, did illicit brewers kill my son to avenge crackdowns? Now, Chief Jane Muthoni, she is supposed to return to work after the bereavement period, but she is not sure she wants to. She is lost in a melee of fear, suspicion and anger on one end and the zeal to fight illicit brews on the other. The Gituamba chief strongly suspects that of her life. The day she was at home when she received a call from the village elder Mwangi Murimi, he told me that I needed to go to an area called Plot 10 in Kiambogo sublocation. I did not suspect anything when he called. Joe had been away for 2 days, but I thought he had traveled or something, she said.
Chief Muchui told Nation Africa at her home that after that first call, several other people also called her, each asking her to rush to Plot 10. The calls became too many and she had to ignore some of them. And I quote, "I drove to Plot 10, they stared," she said. I stopped and one man came to me and told me, "Pole." I wondered why he said he was sorry, and as I started to aside, I could hear her quarreling and telling him that he needed to prepare me first. All this while, I wondered what they were telling about.
A few minutes later, another woman joined them and they asked her to allow them into her car. That is when they broke the news. I cried. I really cried. It was painful, she said, amid tears. Later, Chief moved her into her vehicle. After a while, I requested them to let me go back and check my son's body again. My aim was to try and establish if he had been murdered there or if his body was dropped there, she said. The training that we go through has some elements of crime scene analysis, and so I wanted to look out for some.
From her analysis, she suspected that her son was killed elsewhere and his body dropped at the corner of a farm at Plot 10. And I quote, "His clothes, and when he was dropped there were signs he struggled to rise up. My favorite son tried to rise, but he could not." She said she suspects some illicit brew makers in her location.
Relate the pain of losing a son, you know. It's indeed a really sad story.
Yeah.
Now to some other 100-kilometer concrete wall along the Kenya-Somalia border aimed at restoring peace in the region and keeping at bay the Al-Shabaab militia group. Now, the new Defense Cabinet Secretary, Aden Duale, described the move as the notion of the wall was mooted following a series of bloody atrocities on April 2nd, 2015 that claimed 148 lives.
Complete with security cameras, a heavy mesh and razor wires running the wall was aimed at limiting the movement of armed militants across the porous border. In an interview with the Weekly Review, Duale also addressed the long-standing Kenya-Uganda dispute of Migingo Island, described rather hilariously by Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni as a senseless battle over some rocky grounds in Lake Victoria. In the interview, Duale also responds to the delicate issues of Kenya Defence Force latest deployment of Eastern Congo, the mission in Somalia, and the task ahead at the defence headquarters.
Now, I have no idea why he picked on me as only he came suitability. However, I'll take the heavy responsibility on me by the President to perform my duty with the diligence and satisfaction that is required. And except for having an early brush with the law of Army General, I have no military background. Nonetheless, I'm very much at home with the military fraternity, and I'll try to make a difference during my tenure as Defense CS. Kenya, Somalia, as well as those in Somalia, Ethiopia, and in other parts of the Horn of Africa, regard you as an influential political leader in the region. How will you balance the expectation with those?
And was asked, and do you think you'll be conflicted with clan politics? This is what he answered. This is rather irritating, if not unfair, questions that keep being directed at me. I'm not the first Kenyan from a community that transcends our borders to be appointed to the defense docket. Or are we suggesting that the Maasai, Luo,
and the question of efficiency by KDF as the excuse for doing so should not arise here? Whether or not my officers can do a better job, that role must be played by the right institutions and personnel as envisaged by the Constitution. Devolution is particularly important and a critical phase of our Constitution, and that is why we maintain the notion of NMS, that is Nairobi Metropolitan Service, headed by a military officer, was a big mistake. Even the notion of transferring the Kenya Meat Commission docket to the military was inappropriate, and we are right now in the process of reversing that. I can assure you that going forward, the Commander-in-Chief of the KDF will revise any such previous mistakes.
Well, we can see that the CS of Defense wants to start his work as fast as possible, because you see that the Al-Shabaab, they have never stopped what they're doing. They have never stopped what they're doing. Even though they have been kept silent at the moment, but you never know when they will attack. So when he says about the wall that was constructed on the border between Kenya and Somalia, he wants to do something that it's going to help the Kenyan government. And let's wait and see what he's going to do about it, because he's not the CS of Defense. We all expect him to work hard and make sure that the security of Kenya and the people of Kenya are well protected.
So I think he's such a good leader, because despite him being a Muslim, I think he's going to do a good job without any favoritism because of religion, and he's going to serve the people fairly.
And in other stories, Gachagua, all Azimio MPs in Mount Kenya will be with me before 2023. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has set himself a December 31st deadline to woo politicians allied to former President Uhuru Kenyatta and Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition leader Raila Odinga. The DP declared that the quest to unite Mount Kenya region under one political roof and mentoring young political leaders was unstoppable, and that he will ensure that those who had strayed into Azimio formation will be back by December 31st. Mr. Gachagua took on former President Uhuru Kenyatta for allegedly failing to mentor young leaders from the area, and instead muzzled those who aspired for leadership position.
Now, he asked leaders in the region to remain united, service political differences, and work together for the region development. As I have said before, politics is now over and it's time to serve the people. During the just concluded elections, Azimio had 13% of votes in this region, and we reached out to professionals, business people, and politicians who had gone astray. I have talked to many of them and have told me they were intimidated and cocked into joining Azimio and are ready to return to the fold, he said. Mr. Gachagua was addressing congregants at Karatina Catholic Church in his Mathira constituency backyard, said the Kenya Kwanza administration was focused on delivering on its promises and uniting the country. We want a peaceful country, and I and President William Ruto have a big task ahead to serve the people of Kenya and bring them together. Recently, President Ruto approached both Kilifi and Mombasa governors, and they are willing to work for us for the sake of development in this country, Mr. Gachagua added.
He called for the unity of Mount Kenya region despite political affiliation, but at the same time criticized the previous leader did not mentor our young leaders, and some of us who tried to raise our heads were met with harassment and intimidation. One of my roles now is to mentor young leaders. That is why you will be seeing me moving around accompanied by young politicians, he said. Several members of parliament from the region, led by Nyeri woman Rep Rahab Mukami, who accompanied the DP, pledged their loyalty and assured they they were solidly behind him as the regional leader, even as they sought to allay fears that crack were emerging in the Kenya Kwanza coalition. Mr. Gachagua had moved to take over political leadership of a region that experienced the most divisive political discourse in this year's general election. Now, we can see that the deputy president wants to unite the Mount Kenya region.
Yeah.
They want the leadership to keep on coming stronger and stronger, because you see at the moment that they see as if there's no leaders from Mount Kenya except from him. And he keeps on saying that the former president, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, did not mentor those young people and the youths to at least to come out and see what they can do for the government.
Yeah.
Do you think it's the right thing to criticize the former president for not doing what he said he was not doing?
I think it's not the right thing, because I'm always forced to think that every time Mr. Gachagua speaks against the former president, it's because of the issues they had and the enmity they had formed in the previous regime. Because we saw Mr. Uhuru, when he was in power, he closed, he freezed all the bank accounts of Mr. Gachagua because of some cases they were saying they had. And so every time he criticizes him, I think it's still the grudge he has against him, because he really gave him a hard time in his staff, in his working, in his even in terms of money. He really violated his right, even his privacy. So I think he's still holding on to that grudge, which has never left him.
Well, we can see that he is one of the people from Kenya that he seriously has a grudge on the former president, because you see that every now and then when he talks, he's either talking about the former president or the chief opposition leader, Mr. Raila Amolo Odinga, and now he's criticizing the former president. But let's see if whatever he's saying is going to be the correct words he's saying, because we're expecting that to see more leaders coming from the younger generation at the moment. Let's see if he's going to mentor them.
Okay, now to some other stories. MPs from maize-growing regions oppose imports. Legislators from maize-growing zones in the country, particularly the Rift Valley, want the government to immediately halt importation of maize until it has moved the 2022 harvest, citing the interest of farmers. The elected leaders from the zones will be meeting Agriculture Cabinet Secretary Mithika Linturi and his trade counterpart Moses Kuria to discuss the way forward on plans to import maize. Nandi Senator Samson Cherengai, who is among those opposed to plans to import 10 million bags of maize to mitigate the current food crisis, impossible to bar the duty-free imports.
He told Mr. Kuria to suspend the process until February to allow farmers to harvest their maize and sell it. The senator said farmers from the maize-growing parts of the Rift Valley are anticipating a bumper harvest. Hence, importation of the maize will flood local markets at their expenses. For farmers in the North Rift and most parts of Kenya, where we plant maize, this is the harvest season, and we thought it wise that the Ministry of Trade should hold on importation of maize until we harvest ours, and the NCBP, the National Cereal and Produce Board, opens the stores for farmers to deliver their produce, he said, the Nandi senator. He wants the government to set viable prices for maize from farmers ahead the anticipated harvest. Mr. Cherengai said the importation of 10 million bags of maize will greatly affect the price of local maize, bearing in mind that the cost of farming inputs during the last planting season was extremely high. The legislator defended farmers against allegation of hiding maize, accusing NCPB and trade sector to focus on the